Some promises are meant to be kept, because breaking them invites horrors beyond imagination. 15 years had passed since Rayan last set foot in his ancestral village. He had moved to London as a child, leaving behind the whispers of old legends and dark warnings. But time has a cruel way of erasing fear, and what once seemed like an unbreakable vow had faded into a distant memory. When he returned to the village for a brief visit, nostalgia overwhelmed him. The towering pine trees, the cascading waterfall, and the old bridge looked just as they had in his childhood. But something in the air felt off. He shrugged it off, assuming it was just the eerie stillness of the night. Driving back from the village, Rayan was accompanied by his cousin Hyder, Hyder's wife, their young daughter, and his best friend, Saad. The car glided through the winding mountain roads, the only sound being the soft hum of music playing on the radio. Then, out of nowhere, Saad leaned in and whispered, "Turn off the music. Something is wrong." Rayan glanced at him, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "Just do it," Saad insisted. The moment the music stopped, an unnatural silence filled the car. The trees outside seemed to stretch taller, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers. The road, which should have been smooth, now felt endless, as if they weren't moving at all. Then it started. A strange, white figure darted between the trees, moving with an inhuman grace. At first, Rayan thought it was an owl, but as he stared harder, he saw its true form. It was not a bird. It was not even human. It was something else. Something that defied logic. The figure leapt from one tree to another, crossing the road in massive strides. Every time it landed, the branches cracked and swayed under its immense weight. And yet, it made no sound. Rayan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. His heart pounded as his mind raced back to the warnings of his childhood, the ones he had ignored. Never return to the forbidden place. Never break the oath. His breath hitched as the car's brakes suddenly refused to work. No matter how hard he pressed, the vehicle did not slow down. The steering wheel locked, trapping them in a terrifying path toward the cliffside. Desperation took over. "La ilaha illallah," Rayan whispered the kalma, his voice shaking, and just as suddenly as it had begun, the terror ceased. The car jerked to a stop, its front wheels teetering over the edge of the abyss. It was as if an unseen force had grabbed them at the last second, preventing their doom. For a moment, nobody moved. The silence was deafening. Saad exhaled shakily. "Divine intervention," he muttered. "We should not have come back." They made it home that night, but Rayan knew the nightmare had only just begun. That night, an old cleric was called, someone who had once helped Rayan's grandfather. The cleric's face darkened when he heard what had happened. "You have shattered the oath," he whispered gravely. "The shadows have marked you. They will not rest until they have what they were promised." Rayan was given a sacred amulet, one that was meant to protect him from the darkness. "Do not take this off, no matter what happens," the cleric warned. For a while, the nightmares subsided. But temptation is a cruel thing. One morning, as Rayan prepared to shower, he hesitated. "I shouldn't take this into the bathroom," he thought. He placed the amulet in a drawer, locking it securely before stepping away. When he returned minutes later, the drawer was open. The amulet was gone. Nobody else had the key. Panic set in. His hands trembled as he called the cleric. The old man answered on the first ring. Before Rayan could even speak, the cleric's voice came through, eerily calm. "You removed it, didn't you?" Ryan's breath hitched. How do you... They took it, the cleric interrupted. And now they will come for you. What followed was a descent into madness. Shadows moved in his home in London. Doors creaked open in the dead of night. And worst of all, he wasn't alone in his own reflection. One evening, as he passed by a large mirror, he saw something that wasn't supposed to be there. A woman. Her neck was twisted at an impossible angle, her mouth stretched into a sickening grin. She had no upper teeth, only 2 fangs on either side. Her eyes, hollow and red, bore into his soul. She was waiting for him. That night, the nightmares took a darker turn. He dreamt of a monstrous figure with horns, its mouth stretching unnaturally wide as it whispered his name. The dream felt so real that he woke up gasping for air, only to find deep bruises around his throat, as if unseen hands had tried to strangle him in his sleep. Ryan's life crumbled. His wealth, his success, his family, everything slipped through his fingers. No matter what he did, he couldn't escape the doom that loomed over him. And then, one night, as he sat in his darkened room, he heard a whisper, low, guttural, and unmistakable. You broke the oath. Now we come to collect. The shadows moved, the door creaked open, and the nightmare became reality. Some promises are meant to be kept, because breaking them invites horrors beyond imagination. When I became an adult, I realized that fate had given me a face that left a lasting impression on people. Everyone has a face, some stunning, some ordinary. But whenever I looked in the mirror, I felt uniquely beautiful. During that time, a new tenant moved into our neighborhood. His name was Daniel. Living on the same street meant that eventually we would cross paths, and when we finally did, it was as if destiny had planned it. Daniel was just as striking as I believed myself to be. He carried himself with the charm of a movie star, his presence leaving a deep imprint on my heart. And as it turned out, he felt the same way about me. From the moment our eyes met, it was as if we had both found the person we had been waiting for our entire lives. Our meetings grew frequent, turning into something deeper, until Daniel eventually said, I will send my family to ask for your hand, Emily, if you can convince your parents. My parents, who had only one daughter, always dreamed of finding a perfect match for me, someone who would bring happiness into my life. Initially, my mother hesitated, but her love for me won over her doubts. When she saw Daniel, she understood why I had chosen him. My father agreed as well, and soon Daniel's parents arrived with a marriage proposal, which was accepted with joy. But what I didn't know was that there were others who had plans for Daniel. His uncle and aunt had long wished for him to marry their daughter, Olivia. Olivia, who had secretly admired Daniel for years, had dreamt of him being hers. When she expressed her desire to her parents, they were thrilled. They had planned Daniel's future before he even knew about it. But he had never considered Olivia that way. When his uncle and aunt learned about our engagement, they were furious. They tried everything to change his mind, reminding him of Olivia and urging him to rethink his decision. But Daniel was enchanted by love. He refused to listen. And so, desperate to break us apart, his uncle and aunt turned to something sinister. Unbeknownst to us, they sought the help of a dark practitioner, someone skilled in breaking hearts and twisting fates. Slowly, a strange unrest crept into our relationship. We found ourselves arguing over trivial things, misunderstandings creeping into our once perfect love. But we remained strong, unaware of the invisible forces trying to sever our bond. Despite their relentless efforts, we got married. I arrived at Daniel's house as his bride, and though there was celebration, a strange shadow loomed. His uncle and aunt, though smiling on the outside, were burning with fury. As time passed, our home, once filled with love, became a place of inexplicable discord. Daniel and I would laugh together one moment, only to find ourselves in heated arguments the next. The intensity of our fights grew with time, and each time his uncle and aunt visited, the tension in our home worsened. Then, one day, his uncle, with an unsettling grin, warned, "If I see another fight, I will ensure this marriage ends." At first, we dismissed it as empty words, but something about his tone chilled me to the bone. As days passed, an eerie pattern emerged. Every time we visited Olivia's house, we returned home only to have a terrible argument. It was as if something followed us back, whispering poison into our ears. Despite this, life went on. Our first child, a daughter, was born. We named her Lily. She was breathtakingly beautiful, a reflection of both her parents. Time passed, and Daniel's work led us to move to a different city. But even in our new home, the tension lingered. Olivia had married another, but whenever we visited, she watched Daniel with eyes that sent a shiver down my spine. One fateful evening, as Daniel and Lily were returning home, a speeding bus came out of nowhere. It struck them, and in an instant, my world was shattered. Lily died on the spot. Daniel survived, but he was never the same again. The incident felt unreal. The impact should not have killed her. Witnesses were baffled. They insisted that Daniel had taken the brunt of the hit. How could Lily have died from such a minor impact? But she had, and I was left broken. Months passed, but grief clung to me. And then, one night, I awoke to a suffocating stillness. A faint, eerie glow filled our room, the air thick with something unseen. I felt an irresistible pull to step outside. As I walked to the courtyard, I heard it. Soft, heartbreaking sobs. And then I saw her, Lily, sitting in a shadowed corner, her small frame trembling as she wept into her knees. My breath caught. I whispered, "Lily?" She lifted her face. Her eyes, filled with sorrow, met mine, and in that instant, she vanished. I stood frozen, my body numb, my heart hammering in my chest. Was it a dream, a trick of my grief-stricken mind? Or had I truly seen my daughter? As the days passed, I remained silent about what I had witnessed. Until one day, I visited a relative whose house had recently been robbed. There, a strange ritual was being performed, an attempt to uncover the thief. A young boy, seated with a cloth over his head, was muttering visions. Curious, I stayed and listened. Then someone suggested, "Ask if you have any questions." Before I could stop myself, I whispered, "Where is my daughter?" The boy fell silent. Then, in a trembling voice, he spoke. "She is crying, sitting in a dark corner. She lifts her face. She sees her mother." A chill ran down my spine. And then, as if recounting a nightmare, the boy began to speak of a woman who had taken strands of Lily's hair, a piece of her clothing, even a missing shoe, and had buried them in an old grave under the guidance of a sinister man. He described Olivia. He described what had been done. I was shaking. The pieces fit too perfectly. The unexplained fights, the unnatural death, the eerie presence in my home. It all pointed to something far darker than I had ever believed in. When I confronted Daniel, he was skeptical, but when Olivia's own brother visited us days later, he confirmed our worst fears. His spiritual guide had revealed the same truth. Lily had been taken through dark magic. To this day, Daniel and I struggle. Though we love each other, the unseen weight of something sinister still lingers between us. We sleep in separate rooms, bound by love, but torn apart by forces beyond our understanding. And I am left with one haunting question. Why was my Lily crying that night?